Hi, I'm Julie Hawks. Welcome to the Laws of Peace, where you will learn how to understand and apply God's laws in simple ways so that you can take small steps to create big changes and miracles and become the person you are always meant to be. The answers are in the scriptures. Let me show you how to find them. Today's episode is called Why It's Okay to Give Something Up. This month, we are studying the law of sacrifice. The law of sacrifice states that something always has to be sacrificed for something else. Everything has a price, and a price must be paid for everything. That's from Raymond Hollywell in his book, Working the Law. This is what Bob Proctor had to say about the law of sacrifice. He said, the law of sacrifice is to give up something that is of a lower nature for something that is of a higher nature. For example, in order to enjoy extraordinary success in life, we have to sacrifice our time, put in the effort, and be disciplined to work for what we want in order to achieve it. We need to persevere and be persistent to work on what we want so that we can have success. Many people don't like the law of sacrifice because it implies pain and hardship. People focus too much on what they're giving up instead of what they will be receiving. For instance, I have a friend who recently received a health diagnosis, which is requiring her to change her diet and in big ways. And she could focus on what she's giving up, but instead she's choosing to focus on all of the things that she's getting, that she's going to have better health, she's going to have more energy, she's going to feel better. And when you focus on those things, it makes all the difference in the world. When we get too focused on what we're giving up, that's a scarcity mindset. And that scarcity mindset blocks consistent action, and then the results are never achieved. Let's talk about all this in the scriptures. I want to teach you something called the more principle. Basically, the more principle states that when we give a little bit, the Lord always gives us more. Let's start in Luke chapter 6, verse 38, one of my favorite verses. It said, give, and it shall be given unto you, good measure, pressed down and shaken together, and running over shall men give into your bosom. For with the same measure that ye meet, will it also be measured out to you again. It's this idea that God is going to give us this much when we give this much. We can see this. The Savior was trying to teach this principle when the disciples were fighting on the boat after the feeding of the 4,000. It's a really crazy story. Go read it. It's in Mark chapter 8. But we're going to catch up when the Savior comes up to them and they're fighting. And he says, well, having eyes see ye not, and having ears hear ye not, and do you not remember? He's like, what the heck are you guys fighting about food for? They were hungry and they had left the leftovers of the fish and loaves. And so they got on the boat. They didn't have any food. And he said this in verse 19, when I break the 5 loaves among 5,000, how many baskets full of fragments took ye up? And they said unto him, 12. They had 12 baskets left over after feeding all those thousands of people. And in verse 20, and when the 7 among 4,000, how many baskets full of fragments took ye up? And they said, 7. And he said unto them, how is it that you do not understand? What is he trying to get them to understand? It's the more principle. A few loaves and fishes were given, but thousands were fed, and then there were leftovers. God always gives us more. Every time, every time, every time. We give up a little bit, and he gives us more. Let's go see another story about this. This is the widow of Zarephath. You guys are all familiar with this story. It was a drought. The prophet Elijah was hungry. He shows up to the widow of Zarephath's door and he says, I'm thirsty. Give me something to drink. And she gave him something to drink. And then he said, I'm hungry. Give me something to eat. And then she tells this really dramatic verse. Let me read it to you. She said, in verse 12 of 1 Kings chapter 17, she said, as the Lord liveth, I have not a cake, but an handful of meal in a barrel and a little oil in a cruse. And behold, I'm gathering 2 sticks. So we know how little she has, because only 2 sticks is going to make a really small fire. I'm gathering 2 sticks that I may go in and dress it for me and my son, that we may eat it and die. Now, she sounds over dramatic when she says we're going to eat and die. But the reality is this really speaks to her deep, deep fear of not having enough food to feed her family. And then the prophet Elijah asked for the impossible. He said, first of all, he tells her not to be afraid. In verse 13, he says, fear not, and go and do as thou hast said, but make me therefore a little cake first, and bring it unto me, and after make for thee and thy son. Now, if I had a small son and he was hungry, and the prophet is an old man, and he says, feed me first, wouldn't that be hard? That would be a huge sacrifice, right? But God is asking her to sacrifice her faith because he just promised her that she will always have enough. In verse 14, he says, "For thus saith the Lord of God Israel, the barrel of meal shall not waste, neither shall the cruse of oil fail until the day of the Lord sendeth the rain upon the earth." He's asking for faith. Do you have that kind of faith? Could you sacrifice a little bit to get more? In verse 15, and she went and did, she took action, she made the sacrifice, according to the saying of Elijah, and she and he and her house did eat for many days. Isn't that a beautiful story about the Lord giving more when we sacrifice a little bit? God always gives us more. It's okay to make the sacrifice. L. Todd Budge, in his talk, Giving Holiness to the Lord, explains this very beautifully. He talks about what it means to sacrifice. He said, in the modern usage, the term sacrifice has come to denote the concept of giving up. And that's what we think of, right? That my friend who has to change the way she's eating, she's giving up certain foods so that she can feel better. And again, when we focus on that scarcity of giving something up, it makes it really difficult for us to be consistent. Let's continue with Todd Budge. He said, in the modern usage, the term sacrifice has come to connote the concept of giving up things for the Lord and his kingdom. However, in ancient days, the meaning of the word sacrifice was more closely tied to its two Latin roots, sacer, meaning sacred or holy, and facer, meaning to make. Thus, anciently, sacrifice meant literally to make something or someone holy. Viewed as such, sacrifice is the process of becoming holy and coming to know God, not an event or a ritualistic giving up of things for the Lord. Isn't that beautiful? Isn't that beautiful? He continues. He says, sacrifice is less about giving up and more about giving to the Lord. Engraved upon the entrance of each of our temples in the word is the words holiness to the Lord, the house of the Lord. As we observe our covenants by sacrifice, we are made holy through the grace of Jesus Christ. And at the altars of the holy temple with broken hearts and contrite spirits, we give our holiness to the Lord. So beautiful, he continues. Elder Neil A. Maxwell taught the submission of one's will or heart is really the only uniquely personal thing we have to place on God's altar. However, when you and I finally submit ourselves by letting our individuals be swallowed up in God's will, then we are really giving something to him. Ultimately, the Lord wants our hearts. And then Elder Budge says, when we viewed from the perspective of giving to the Lord, our sacrifices on behalf of others become gifts, and the joy of generously giving becomes its own reward. Freed from the need for love, approval, or appreciation from others, our sacrifices become the purest and deepest expressions of our gratitude and love for the Savior and our fellow men. Any prideful sense of self-sacrifice gives way to feelings of gratitude, generosity, contentment, and joy. Something is made holy, whether it be our lives, our possessions, our time, our talents, not simply by giving it up, but rather by consecrating it to the Lord. The principle that Elder Budge is teaching us is that we have more joy, more peace, more humility, more love when we are willing to give to the Lord. And he invites us to give sacrifices individually. It's very, very fascinating. But hopefully this is starting to change your perspective about what it means to sacrifice. And hopefully you're going to remember the more principle that you give a little bit to the Lord and he's going to give you so much more. We see that over and over and over again in the scriptures. And quite frankly, if you'll look into your own life, you'll see that same principle very active in your own life, that when you give a little bit, the Lord always gives you more. Look for that in your life. Look for those blessings that are coming as you make those small sacrifices to the Lord. And then my invitation for you today, beyond looking for where the Lord is showing up and giving you more, that more principle, what are you willing to sacrifice for the Lord? What are you willing to give to the Lord so that you can be holy, so that you can be consecrated, so that you can have more joy in your life? If you ask the Lord, he will give you that answer. What is it that he wants from you? Thank you so much for being here. If you have loved this podcast, will you share it with somebody else? Thanks again. Have an awesome, awesome day.